The dogs and the cats and the monkeys are a lot like you. The chickens and the cows and the geese, they're a lot like me. We all just want to be. We all just want to be. We all just want to live happy and free. So welcome to another episode of Animals Have Rights. Let's see, first things first, in the news, how many of you watch baseball? It was just a week and a half ago about that the All-Star game took place, and part of the festivities was the home run derby. Did you catch that? It was pretty exciting if you like baseball. And did you notice that Prince Fielder of the Milwaukee Brewers, go Brewers, was, when he was up, he won, by the way, but the commentators on the show I was watching, the version, they were saying, he'll never last. He's putting too much effort into it. And they said this, of course, as he's getting hit after hit, and he's driving the ball like into the third tier of the outfield, hitting it much further than anybody else was hitting it. The reason I bring this up is people always say that vegetarians and vegans are weak and don't have any strength to do anything. You may not know that Prince Fielder is an ethical vegetarian. His wife gave him the book Skinny Bitch, and after reading that, he decided he was going to quit eating animals. In fact, he's had a special glove made that's made out of vinyl. That's pretty interesting. Go Prince, go Brewers. Let's see. Also in the news, yesterday or today, if you're on the Alliance for Animals mailing list, you may have got a recent mailing. This is the mailing right here, and it covers an important issue. Basically, it covers the issue of the University of Wisconsin breaking the law. And in fact, it says that, let me quote from you, the Wisconsin Statute 951.025, or Crimes Against Animals, says, and I quote, decompression prohibited. No person may kill an animal by means of decompression. Well, what we found out, in fact, was since about 1988 that the university has, at the Biotron, they've been decompressing sheep. And there's 3 published studies on this now. And essentially what happens is they pressurize, they'll put sheep in a decompression chamber, they pressurize the tank, and then they rapidly decompress them. And what this does is it causes a case of the bends. This is the same thing that divers get if scuba divers get if they surface too quickly, or submariners get if they have to get out of a submarine quickly and come to the surface. Caisson workers also get this if they decompress too quickly. And what it does is, when you're at high levels of compression, carbon dioxide is it's squeezed into a higher rate into your blood system. You don't expel it as rapidly. And in the process of being under that compression and the gas in your blood, it's carried through all of the organs and the tissues throughout your body. So you end up with these excess or higher concentrations of carbon dioxide in your bones, in your all of your organs. And then when you decompress very rapidly, that carbon dioxide swells up and forms bubbles. And so when that happens, of course, in your tissues, it can cause blood embolisms. If it's in your brain, it can cause stroke. But if it's in your bones, it can be, as you might imagine, apparently incredibly painful. And so they talk about in their papers, they talk about the sheep that they decompress. And here's, for instance, in 2008, this is from the mailing. I hope you get this, and if you didn't get this, you should get on the Alliance for Animals mailing list. 16 adult Suffolk ewes with no evidence of clinical lameness and with normal limb bone scans were subjected to a single 24-hour exposure of compressed air at the UW Biotron. After the decompression sickness, such as each limb lifting, a manifestation of the discomfort in limb bends, labored breathing or panting, indicative of pulmonary gas embolism, otherwise known as the chokes or respiratory decompression sickness, was recorded for each animal. The decompression caused fatalities, respiration decompression sickness. All 4 of the control sheep that breathed air only during decompression died of of RDCS, or decompression sickness. And they've been doing this for, as I said, for over a decade. And the state law is quite clear. It's against the law to kill an animal through decompression, but in fact they're doing it here at the University of Wisconsin. Apparently the laws against anti-cruelty don't matter to them at all. Well, that's the quick little blurbs of news I have. Let's turn the show over now to our special feature, Animals and the Law Today, with our legal beagle, Leslie Hamilton. Leslie, take it away.
Hi, Rick, and good evening. Welcome back to all of you who care about animals, and welcome to the animals for whom you care. I am here to report some good news from Washington, D.C. As you know, as a regular feature of this segment, we try to keep track of animal-related legislation going on or having been introduced and argued, debated, and voted on in Washington, federal laws, in other words, as well as Wisconsin laws. The good news out of Washington is that the Wild Free-Roaming Horses Act and Burros Act, that is otherwise known as ROAM, was passed by the House of Representatives on the 17th, so it was about a week ago. That has been referred now to the Senate for a vote. The ROAM Act will provide needed protections for the nation's wild mustangs and other wild horses, prohibiting their sale for slaughter. It also provides for contraception for the animals, because we do have millions of them. The expansion of available grazing lands, supporting public-private partnerships such as that which has been proposed by T. Boone Pickens, and his wife Madeline, to establish a 1 million acre sanctuary for these iconic symbols of Americans' Western heritage. So thank you to a few of our Wisconsin Congress people, including Tammy Baldwin, who voted yes, and Steve Kagan, who I believe is going to be running for re-election up in the Brown County area. So thank you, Congressman Kagan. A boo goes to Ron Kind, a Democrat from Wisconsin, voted no, as did Paul Ryan. And of course, no surprise here, Mr. James Sensenbrenner voted no. The other good news from Congress, from Washington, D.C., is that the Primate Safety Act has been reported out of the Senate committee to which it was referred in March, and it was favorably reported. That act will amend the Lacey Act to treat non-human primates as what are called prohibited wildlife species, essentially prohibiting their import, export, and transfer across state lines for purposes of the pet trade. So that again is called the Captive Primate Safety Act, and it will prohibit, as I said, the import, the export, the transport, the sale, the receipt, acquiring or purchasing a live animal of either the a non-human primate variety or of the feline, wild feline, lion, tiger, leopard, cheetah, jaguar, or cougar are already included in that prohibition. So this law was passed by the House back in February, was sent on to the Senate, referred to that committee, now has been reported out of the committee favorably with no amendments, and is scheduled for a vote in the Senate. So you may want to contact either Senator Cole or Senator Feingold, or both of them, because both of them represent everyone in the state of Wisconsin. Let them know how you feel about the Captive Primate Safety Act. The last matter, we've had no action in Congress on the Great Ape Protection Act, which will prohibit invasive research on our great apes, including the gorilla and the bonobo, chimpanzee, the orangutan, and the gibbon. although I'm told that gibbons aren't technically considered great apes. Thank you for Congress for including them in the new legal definition of great ape, at least for purposes of their protection. Also in Washington, although not in Congress, but in the Supreme Court, as I mentioned, I believe a couple months ago, the U.S. Supreme Court has accepted an appeal in a case involving the right to free expression or freedom of speech versus the rights of animals to live or without cruelty. And that case is United States versus Stevens. Stevens, as you may remember, produces what are commonly referred to as crush videos, where animals are killed on screen, sort of like a snuff video in the human trade. And the Supreme Court took the appeal from the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals in the Third Circuit decided that the right to free expression trumped an animal's right to life and to live free from cruelty. So we're anxious to find out what the U.S. Supreme Court will decide. That decision will not be released until after October 1st. However, briefs have already been filed with the Supreme Court, and those briefs are available online if you're interested in reading them. Back into the more local sphere here, bringing you back into Madison and the case we brought up almost every segment, and that was the three purported human beings, men up in Appleton area who chased down and killed several deer with their snowmobiles. And of course, the criminal charges against them were dropped recently because of a question as to whether or not you can prosecute someone criminally for acts that they committed while hunting. And they claimed they were hunting, apparently. So we have news that the Attorney General of the state of Wisconsin will appeal the dismissal of those charges. That was good news, we learned last week. You may also be interested in knowing that at least 3 of our Wisconsin legislators are in the process of drafting and introducing amendments to our laws that will make it clear that this kind of activity is prohibited in Wisconsin. And those representatives include Penny Bernard Schaber, a Democrat from Appleton, Dean Coffert from Neenah, and Andy Jorgensen from Fort Atkinson. So thank you to those individuals for stepping forward to make sure the laws protect wildlife in Wisconsin. And then as a final note, just to remind you that we have 2 bills still pending, waiting for committee hearings in the Wisconsin legislature. One is the Assembly bill, the original puppy mill bill, pet facilities regulation bill, whatever you would like to call it. That is Assembly Bill 250, the companion Senate Bill 208, and they will be the subject of a joint hearing sometime within the next 30 days. So keep your eyes on the legislative website so that you can attend those hearings and give the legislatures your thoughts and support, perhaps, of legislation to regulate the horrendous conditions that dogs are subjected to in the puppy mills in Wisconsin, of which there are reportedly over 1,300. So that's it for animals in the news, or excuse me, in the law today, law news. And I'll send it back to Rick. And thank you for tuning in. That is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth regarding animals in the law today. Good night.
Thank you for that, Leslie. Always interesting and some good, some bad every time you report to us. It was just quickly a little book talk for you. I just finished reading, well, let me ask you a question. How many of you know something about history? When did black slavery end in the United States? And if you're like me, you probably believe that black slavery ended when Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, or thereabouts, late 1860s. In fact, you may not know this, but slavery in the United States, the slavery of blacks in the United States, really didn't end until 1945. That's sort of a shock, isn't it? A recent winner of the Pulitzer Prize is Douglas Blackman's Slavery by Another Name. And so I'd urge you to get a hold of the book. and the reason that I bring this up in relation to animals is that we always hear, of course, that there's all these laws that are around that protect animals in labs, and the Animal Welfare Act, the Public Health Service, Animal Research Act, NIH's stuff. But in fact, it turns out that given the opportunity, people ignore laws that are intended to protect others. And in the case of blacks, for just shortly after the Civil War, they started actually buying and selling blacks again. And they passed a number of laws that essentially made it illegal to be black in the South. And so they would round people up, they would arrest them. They would, for things like vagrancy or selling products to their produce to after dark, or just silly things, talking loud in the presence of or near a white woman. So they would arrest them. They would find them guilty and charge them $1. But then they would assign all sorts of fines, their fees that they had to pay. They had to pay a fee to a prosecuting attorney, the district attorney. They had to pay fees to the jurors, to the judge, to the sheriff that arrested them, all these sorts of things. And often these fees would amount to $20, $30, $40, money that a poor black in the South right after the Civil War simply didn't have. And so what they would do then is somebody would come in, like U.S. Steel would come in, and they would buy the person by paying their fees, and then they would take them away. And in fact, they would often never release them, and they would work them to death. The people were often shackled together. They were literally whipped, and if they didn't dig enough coal for them, they lived for years underground. It was quite hideous, and there was an endless supply. And since nobody really had an investment in them, as they did during the days of slavery, they were so much cheaper after this situation was put into effect that it was really quite horrible. The interesting thing about all of this is, or one of the interesting things, is that it didn't end until World War II, and Roosevelt recognized that they needed to perhaps call on the black population to serve in the army, and they were afraid that the Japanese and German propagandists would basically convince them to revolt and rise up or not become involved, because they would call attention to what was going on. And this was going on in literally thousands and thousands and thousands of cases throughout the South. So interestingly though, why do those bad things go on? Why do people like U.S. Steel, why do organizations do horrible things to each other? And that I would urge you to look into Stanley Milgram's work. I was going to talk to you a little bit about that, but I want to quickly, I don't have a lot of time, maybe 10 minutes here. I want to jump over and talk about people doing bad things. There's a new, NIH has put together a new web research tool. I've actually published, I have five pages here. This is current research that's going on for 2009 and 8 for the University of Wisconsin here. It's mostly 2009. I see one or two 2008s still slipped in here for research on primates. And I thought I would just quickly run down the list and look at the money involved. I used to have to go to a couple different websites to figure out how much all of this was costing. But for instance, the base grant for 2009 this year, the Primate Center, this is for basically feeding the monkeys, paying the people who clean their cages out and all that. They're getting, the base grant is $8.5 million for this year alone. Buddy Capuano, you might remember that there's two, they've gotten, he's the PI, he's the attending veterinarian at the Primate Center, but two grants, one for $480,000 and one for $423,000, has to do with improvement of the facilities. Remember when the article came out, it was Bill Leader's article about a month or so ago, My Monkey was in the Isthmus, and one of the things that they talked about, or I mentioned in the article, was quoted in the article saying something about the rates of diarrhea. And you might remember that veterinarian Dr. Capuano and the director, Joe Chemnitz, said, diarrhea, we've got it under control. It's not that many monkeys at the center have it, and it's just a normal sort of a thing. But listen to this. This is in a $400,000 grant. It says, since its inception in 2002, this is the the specific pathogen-free colony of monkeys at the Primate Center. This is actually Capuano saying this, or writing this. The incidence of diarrhea in the portion of the colony that's housed in stationary caging is quite high. The personnel of the Animal Services Division of the center believe that the incidence of diarrhea is related directly to the stationary cages where the animals are housed. They think if they put the cages on wheels, the diarrhea will go away. This is the level of biological or medical understanding. They don't know. Essentially, and nobody in the United States does. Nobody knows why all of the monkeys housed in the labs have diarrhea, and no matter what they do, they can't seem to solve the problem. So we're going to spend $400,000 plus on trying to do new cages for them. And in fact, there's one grant for $423,000 that Capuano has, and they're going to buy 50 sets of banks of 4 cages. And that's going to cost us $423,000. The other grant where they were trying to do the rolling cages to stop the diarrhea was $480,000. Chris Coe, the director of the Harlow Lab, he's making this year, 2009, his grants total about $750,000 to study the 2 studies. It's called maternal flu infection and brain development in primates. Essentially, I might have told you this before, he's infecting mother monkeys with the flu, and in another study, it's called gestational stress and impaired iron homeostasis in the young infant. They're stressing the mother monkeys again, and then seeing what the results are to their babies after they're born. Let's see, Ned Kalin, who works with Richard Davidson, the guy who's telling us that we need to be compassionate. His study on the development and regulation of emotion, actually they're studying fear in primates. Kalin, for 2009, he's getting over $535,500, over $500,000, and it's page after page. Mary Schneider, who's studying the effects of alcohol to developing fetuses in monkeys. How stupid is that? She has 2 grants, one for $578,000, one for $617,000 combined. What's that? $1.1 million she's getting. Remember A. Terasawa? Do you remember when the USDA came in? This was about, 6 years ago, 5 years ago. They went in and found out that she had, the people that were supposed to be monitoring the elderly monkeys who were having these chemicals pumped in and out of their brain, they went away on lunch and the monkeys were dying in the chairs. At least one elderly monkey died. Actually, I think 2 monkeys died. So they suspended her and said she couldn't be around animals for 2 years. Well, she has 3 grants for 2009, all still doing the same stuff. One of them's for $390,000, another for $380,000, another for $370,000. So she's making, what's that, 12, 13, about $1.3 million in 2008 and 9. One of these was for 2008, the other's 2009. You can find this information yourself. If you go to the NIH website and you'll look on the left-hand side, and there's a thing called Report, and you can click on that. There's a little search engine, write University of Wisconsin, and in the search field, put in macaque, monkey, rhesus, marmoset, and click search, and you too can find all this information out. And it just goes on and on. I guess the person that brings in the most money is probably David Watkins. David Watkins, of course, has for years been trying to, one of his studies is called, I thought it just cracked me up, a novel logical approach to HIV development. So after all this time of trying to find a vaccine for HIV, he says now he's come up with a logical approach, only his logic is to infect monkeys with simian immunodeficiency virus, a different disease in a different species, and watch them die. And in fact, he has 6 funded grants that are running anything from $172,000 to $730,000. All told, it looks like he's got about, maybe $3 million worth in federal grants for 2009. And it goes on, page after page after page of this sort of thing. Remember, these people, it's sort of understandable why Watkins would be doing this, doesn't it? I mean, he's making so much money, probably flying all around the world, giving presentations in, Tahiti for all I know. But he can't do this unless people are willing to do it for him. His lab workers, the people that are infecting the animals, he can't do it without them. So why would people who are making nothing or just working for small amounts, why would they do that sort of stuff? That brings me to Stanley Milgram, of course. I urge you to read about Milgram. Obedience to Authority is his premier work. There's all sorts of books that have been written about Milgram. Milgram was the guy who discovered that if somebody in a white lab coat tells somebody to do something, no matter how nasty, how bad, kill somebody else, shock them till they die, most of us will do it. And it explains why companies like U.S. Steel could tell people to go buy black prisoners and put them underground for years at a time, barely feed them, whip them if they didn't dig enough coal for U.S. Steel, and on and on and on. Hoy, it's really something, isn't it? It's really something. I think we're close to our time. I'm not too sure. Let me remind you, if you haven't yet signed up to be on the Alliance mailing, remember it's allanimals.org. There's a letter, postcard here that you could actually send in to the District Attorney Blanchard and ask him to look into prosecuting. It's goes to Dane County District Attorney Brian Blanchard, comes in the mailing. You can fill out the postcard and say prosecute the University of Wisconsin for breaking the cruelty to animal statutes. These sheep are suffering horribly when they do these things to them. The bends is supposed to be just a horribly painful affliction. And it's monkeys, it's dogs, it's sheep, it's all animals at the university. It's around the world. This is just one tiny small microcosm of what's going on. And apparently that they can find people that'll do anything that they tell them to. So I think that's pretty much it. A big shout out to Angelo again. And remember that the dogs and the cats and the monkeys are a lot like you. The chickens and the cows and the geese, they're a lot like me. And we all just want to live happy and free. So let's leave them alone and go Brewers. That's it for Animals Have Rights. The dogs and the cats and the monkeys are a lot like you. The chickens and the cows and the geese, they're a lot like me. We all just want to be, we all just want to be, we all just want to live happy and free.